everyone, welcome back to LF Tech podcast, where we speak with founders, operators, and industry leaders at the intersection of logistics, technology, and operational transformation about what is changing right now and what actually works in practice. Today, I'm joined by Christian Oestergaard. Christian has spent decades working across postal, parcel, and logistics transformation with deep experience in production IT, IoT, AI, and large-scale operational network. Christian, thank you very much for joining us today.
Hi, Irina. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. It's pleasure. It's actually really great to have you here because few people have seen the logistic industry evolve from traditional postal networks into today's complex parcel, last mile, and digital ecosystem, quite like you have. So, in this interview episode today, we will talk about what really breaks in last mile operations as companies scale, the economics behind delivery convenience, why so many logistic organizations struggle to act as one a holistic system, and the gap between planning and execution. Our goal, as always, is to cut through the buzzword, so we will keep it very practical and conversation like. So, Christian, to start with the foundation, many last mile networks work quite well at a small scale, I should say, but they start breaking as volume grows. From your experience, do you usually see the first cracks appear?
Well, it's a very good question because they can be very individual, and I think that it's something that evolves when you grow. It's also something that you know in the beginning, you typically can feel the whole unit that is working on things, and you have very short distances, and that when you start to scale this, you need to get better data. You need
Mhm.
to make sure that you have geo points, route points, or whatever it is that you need to have in order to make the factual things work. Then you also, when you get that, you also get the complexity of the preparation in order to make sure that you actually can sort and spread out and pack the vehicles and eat all these things. So there's a lot of things that actually complicates when you grow.
Mhm.
Um, and also you also have to sit and take decisions on when should you grow. When should you scale from X vehicles to X vehicles? How should you build up your depots, and how should your network evolve? But it's not just that, it's also about management. It's about management also, in the sense that you can do whatever you want with technology and optimization models or whatever, but if you don't follow the route, it doesn't matter at all. So there's also this management part, that you need to make sure that you have the management focus all the way, that you have the right KPIs, that you actually have a focus on what is it that is our task.
Mhm.
You also have the things that you don't control. And what do you mean by not controlling them? Things are that, what kind of products are you selling? Are you complicating your distribution by opening up for different products? Because when you work with sales, and I have worked a lot with sales, not being in sales, but worked with them and try to find a collaboration, is that you find it's easy maybe to sell time slot deliveries and these things. Making complexity much bigger when you when
Mhm.
you when you're scaling. Because I think I calculated once that if you have three fixed deliveries on in an hour, you can just forget about optimization, more or less. So you also need to make sure that you have the right balance of the right products, and then that you have the right data for your end consumers. When they're there. You know that you have the streets where you're allowed to drive between 10 and 11, and all these things. So there are so many parameters that you have to calculate. So I think many times when you grow, this is really the things that starts to matter. That's my experience.
That's actually very interesting because from what I understand, it's not only about the growing, the scaling, it's about understanding when you should scale. And in so many parts, in that's like every route, parcel, driver, a locker, customer has slightly different conditions. And the system has to be really strong operationally and have that visibility to actually support that growth then. That
Yeah,
goes.
I completely agree, and I think that one of the hardest questions is when you should scale your network. When should you
Mhm.
when is the right time to consolidate one way, either going out or going in, is also just as a big problem. That that many of us in the postal industry have had a lot of depots. That they
Mhm.
actually had a problem going the other way as well, because when you have to look at the driving time between your depots and your end consumers, you need to be that is also becoming a parameter that you need to control. So there is a lot of these things that you have to think about. So it's really a happy feeling when you grow, but it also
Mhm.
needs to be a controlled feeling. That this is what I see, that and you need to really, you really need to have some people sitting behind planning. You need to do some standardization. I think that the biggest benefit we have when you scale is actually that you have some standards.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you here. You cannot scale what hasn't been standardized yet. You don't, even if you don't understand what success looks like, you cannot scale it unless
No.
you have that somehow already framed and shaped.
I can tell
Mhm.
you, when I was building our parcel business in Denmark back in the days, and this is a long time ago. It was, I think, I was responsible for a strategic program in 1998, and then we actually spent, yeah, it's a long time ago. We actually spent quite some time in understanding the parcel market. That I think one
Yeah.
of the fundamentals that you need to have a knowledge of your segmentation. You need to figure out what are the customers that you can live from, which are the customers you can't live from, because you can't take all customers. But what we did was we actually make like a basic law on how to actually do different things.
Mhm.
How do you pack a vehicle? What are the most optimal ways of packing a vehicle? And I think that we ended up in using 6 zones to pack your vehicles, and that was the most efficient. I think we tried it with 4 and 8 and 6, and we really did it very academically. So we had every part of the process was actually described.
Yeah.
We spent quite some time in actually figuring out, how do we do route planning? How do we do these things? How do we load the vehicle? How do we enter the vehicle? How do we get out of the vehicle? And just something that you think is very basic, but it actually helped us quite a lot, and it helped quite a lot to grow. But it also gave you an idea about, if things were not working, you could go back and say, okay, fine, it's not working because we are not following the protocol, or we're not following the process. And you need to have that as well, because that is also the way that you can help to educate management. You can help to educate employees, in order to
Mhm.
make sure that how you can become more efficient. And it's also easier to change one standard is changing an implementation in every corner that you're doing. And I think that we all been there when things eroded, so to speak, and everybody was doing the things in their own way, and then you needed to get back to one way. It's a horrible disease that you have to fix, instead of saying, hey, we already do everything on this way, so from now on we just correct that part. Basic rules, I would say.
Yeah, you lay the foundation and then you grow it, and basically you have something at least you can rely on. So you can change things starting from that foundation, but if you change the foundation every time because you work in different ways, it's just not gonna scale, not gonna work.
Just want to say, I'd say one thing that is important all the time is that you find the right KPIs, you find the good story on how you tell the story, on how you grow, and you need to be aligned with a strong management that actually understands the importance of working in the standardized way, as you say, and follow the scheme that you already are planning. Especially when you roll out, it's really important that you just don't run with the head under your armpit, so to speak, and try to conquer land. No, you need to do it in a real way.
Yeah, exactly. That's so many different parts has to be in the picture just to make it work from the just even to shape the idea properly. And the interesting thing that you mentioned about management, if we look at it from another angle, from this about on the scaling perspective, what are some decisions that sound very logical, I should say, and very good in the planning room, but become difficult once they hit the real daily operations?
It can be that the story is not accepted by people, and especially if you have people who build up their own areas, who are actually, I think some of the things we see many times when we roll out new technology is that the ones who don't have any experience, they just follow the technology because they have no other means. They don't know the routes, they don't know the area. But if you've been driving the area for many time for a long time, then what happens is that you get an idea about how things should be executed, and you do that based on your knowledge. And the thing is that is many times wrong. You can have small rights, but there will be many times will be wrong because you don't have the complete overview. You have an idea. It's like one thing that I found out with myself when I'm driving on holiday and there is a traffic access in front of you, and then you drive off the motorway, and the GPS says it's faster to just stay in the queue and drive slow, but you drive off because it feels more like you're moving. It feels
Yeah.
like you're doing things. And you come on the motorway and then you drive for 10 minutes. Say, bloody hell, that's the car which was in front of me before. And you felt really that you've done something which was right, and it felt also very motivating because you were steering the car and you were moving. But it turned out to be the wrong thing, because
Mhm.
actually happened is that there was actually more speed in the slow street than there was in driving a huge, way around the problem. And I think that this is just an example on what we can do with technology today, because you are monitoring traffic, you are finding out, which points are better to have after each other, and stuff like that. And with this technology today, where you have the flexibility of zone, your zone areas are not just a fixed zone area. No, they're flexible for everyone. And why is that important? Because there's always these points which are close to the line, which is easier to fix from one side at one day and from the other side the other day. And yes, you have experience on where to park and all these things, but over time, if you have the mathematical model telling you where to park and where the distance is shortest between your route point, so to speak, and where you deliver things, it was something that will be mathematically calculated and not based on what you feel. And
Mhm.
and this is where systems today can guide you much better than they could before. So I
Mhm.
think technology has evolved quite a lot. So scaling is also, finding the right tools and making sure that you would partner up with the right people in order to make sure that you get the ideas of what the task is that you have to do, and try to capture so many facts as possible, because the best thing is to be fact based, because we can all sit around the table and discuss facts, but discuss fiction, it will always end up in fiction. So from my point is always trying to get things as factual as possible. That's one of the ground rules, I think, in when you scale or descale, it's be factual.
Hmm. Actually, I really like your comparison with the driving the car. It feels really real, and the part actually the point here is to be as real and as close to the real operations as possible. And as you mentioned, listening to what people really needs, not only having that plan or idea just in your head. And
Mhm.
one interesting part in last mile is about actually convenience and what do people really need, because convenience is such a big part of the last mile conversation now. Like everyone wants faster, more faster delivery, like more options, more flexibility, but convenience, it's never free. In today's parcel market, who do you think actually paying for this part, for the convenience? Is it customer, like the end consumer, the retailer, the carrier, or the network itself?
A good question, who's paying for it. I think the carriers take their large share, and they do that
Mhm.
because they're squeezed in between the ones who paying the bill, which is the customer, and then the ones who wants the parcels, who is usually the end consumer. So it's that is why you always, as a carrier, you are a little bit becoming squeezed. And so, but you're absolutely right. There's nothing that I always say. There's nothing for free. There's everybody needs to figure out how to pay with it, and sometimes it's easier to squeeze one way or squeeze the other way. Convenience is super super important, and I think it's going to be even more important when we come into what we talk about is agentic commerce in the future, where you have very few parameters that it actually is triggering why you buy because you buy with a prompt, and that means that's okay, fine, you can ask for some things, and then you push a button, and then hopefully you don't have to think about it. But the thing that is really important for you is that you can play with your price, you can play with your days of delivery, your speed, so to speak. But when you want to have it, it will be some place where it fits you with that given flexibility. It could be that you needed a put point, or you needed a locker, but it could also that you have a home delivery point, which is more safe. It's more safe to have it at somebody that you know is always home, instead of having it at your own home or whatever. That is, the convenience is individual, extremely individual, and extremely important for how we will act in the future. So the one who owns that convenience spot is actually in the really right place, I think, in the future. So
Mm-hmm.
it's very important to listen to your customers, and to get the feedback from your end consumers, and saying, okay, where is it? We will have a lot of pressure, I would say, coming from the e-commerce, because they sometimes they're a little bit far away. And this is I'm a marketeer back in the days, actually. When I graduated in strategy and marketing, and I never done anything about. I have done all the things, but the thing is that when you are far away from your end consumer, you are more trusting what you think than what you know. And the thing is that the end consumer is pretty much, speed doesn't really matter. It's become a marketing gimmick. I'm sorry to say
Yeah.
that, because how often is it that you start to do something, and then you figure out, hey, I lack a hammer. If you
Mm-hmm.
start to do something and you want to put pictures up on the wall, you will probably make sure that you have that before you start to do something with your wall. You need to see that. We always said that tools is half of the thing. But the thing is, what's happening now is that you see some of these big providers, they are inventing this 2-hour delivery and whatever. And why are they doing that? Because they're the only ones being able to do that. So they are pushing this marketing thing, that the speed is super important, because there will be fewer around the table, so to speak, that actually can do it. So it's a very smart way to keep other outside, from the delivery zone. Because when you look at it as yourself, I try always to be my own customer mentally all the time, trying to figure out what to do. The thing that matters for me is quite often price. I would
Mm-hmm.
probably I would probably look and say, okay, fine, but I would, you know, I'm willing to pay more, though, if I get the things where I want it when I want it, because this is actually what I really want. So the convenience for me is the most important thing. And then the second thing for me is probably the price. I can say so. Time is a little bit variable. I get stressed if I need to get things in 2 hours. I would probably not even be home. So you have to think about that. Some of the things that I see right now happening with convenience is that some of the big carriers. If I shop at Amazon in Copenhagen, they use a solution where they give me a possibility to have an evening delivery and nothing else but an evening delivery, which means that I can get my parcel between 17 and 10, 22 in the evening. It's objectively, it's probably a very good solution, because there's a good chance that I would be home if I had a normal job. But my job is actually to be out. As you know, we meet each other at different places, so I'm usually not home that much. And if I wanted something, I wanted to have a put point, or I wanted to have a locker where I could pick it up, depending on how long the locker would be accessible. If it would be accessible for a week, it probably would fit me very well. But if it was like a shorter time, I would say, okay, then I have again a chance where I'm not being able to pick it up. And the same thing goes with the retail office. So what I want to decide with my convenience is that maybe some days, a put point is not open on Sunday, but maybe Sunday is the only day I'm home. So I would probably take where should I, when I order things, I want to have it in a place where it's important for me that I actually can do the things and pick it up. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why that I think that I'm really not happy about having an evening delivery, even though I can move it for 1 week. They're very flexible, and I think that's fantastic service, but it doesn't fit me as a person. So convenience is extremely individual, and
Yeah.
and that's that's why that you have to really understand your end consumer when it comes to what is really needed. And the thing it was that speed matters. Yes, this was something I said also in the beginning, where ordering an e-commerce was something special. You can probably remember first time you ordered something, almost. Now I'm so old, so I can't remember anything anymore. But the thing is that now you order almost everything. It just becomes a commodity. If I order, it could be toilet rolls. It's not something that is really urgent, and I just order it with a subscription or whatever it is. So I don't want to think about it, but I want to have it in the place where I want. So it's not. So in that sense, it's really a long journey on coming from where you ordered something, like maybe it was your first iPhone, then you were sitting home and waiting for it, and then ordering today, when you get towels, you get whatever you need, you
Just
get
the
these things.
routine.
So is that something that's urgent that I need to have a 2-hour delivery on? Absolutely not.
Mhm.
So I think that this is the speed matters. Yes, it matters, but it also matters that it can be long instead of short. And I think
Mhm.
that is when you talk about the carriers, they just have to do whatever their customer says that they have to do. But sometimes the customers say you have to do something that your end consumer actually don't really care about. Because if you look at it, the average time that you have in the parcel in a locker, even for young people who order on Vinted, is many times more than 24 hours. So why do you need to hurry it out to put it in there when it's just taking space for 24 hours in a locker? So I think that it's something that we have to dig a little bit deeper into, understand how our processes needs to be built in order to meet what actually is actually needed by our end consumer. And I think that we all stressed by that the shipper says, I want it to be ordered. The customer can sit and order until 10 o'clock in the evening, and they should be out next day. And then we stress everything into something which is 6, 8, 10 hours. But then it ends up in a locker or a put point where it lies for more than 24 hours. So we
Yeah.
have this mismatch that we need to figure out better, because it's actually stressing our whole economy for all of us as players, because we start to compete about something that our end consumers don't even want.
Yeah, that's more like creating this competitiveness, even if it's not the something that market actually drives. Sometimes
Mm.
better customer experience and better network efficiency can go in the same direction. For example, like with lockers or Pudo, with better address that data, for example. But sometimes they compete with
Mm.
each other in terms of for example, how long the delivery should take.
Mm.
So it's really interesting point actually. And one thing you mentioned about customers and how we should listen to customers, but Christian, I'm wondering at what point does improving the customer experience start to reduce the network efficiency? Do you think there is such a thing also, or should we always think about what customer needs?
No, we should not always think about it, because I think also what we see that you have operators who are specialized in two-person carrying.
Mm-hmm.
And they're probably 10 times better at it than anybody else would do, because they only built a solution that fits those customers who want to have carrying it. So what I think is that you can't serve all customers. You will never be able to do that. And I've been re-engineering processes for many years, and I've been very fortunate in being part of starting businesses in this industry a couple of times. And I think that one principle that I always had is that processes should be like on a motorway. It should be very easy to get into the motorway, but it should also be very easy to get off the motorway. But the thing
Mm-hmm.
is that on a motorway, you're not allowed to drive under 30 kilometers an hour. They don't want to have a tractor there. They don't want to have a bicycle, or they don't want to have a pedestrian. And the same thing is that you have a speed limit as well. So you're not allowed to drive 220 kilometers on a motorway. So it doesn't fit all processes. So there will be services that you can't put into your standardization for of making something that is compatible, making something that works. That will just stress. So what you do is you make parallel streams. And this is also what happened in the beginning. DHL, they have a courier business. And if it was so bloody smart that they could put the couriers back into DHL standard product, they probably would have done it, because it sounds like there would be money into it. But they're not, because it drives different purposes. And I think it's very important to think that you can't feed all purposes. You need to figure out what part of the market and what part of the processes that you want to be in. And I think that we are getting quite stressed, if you look at it in the way that we are operating today, with 2 hour deliveries, with 4 hour deliveries, with day-to-day deliveries, and somebody wants to consolidate deliveries, and you have all these models. Models are good, but they don't make it more simple. It actually makes more points where you have a possibility to break. And that is something that we need to think about when we open up the flexibility and listening to the end consumers. One thing we saw, I saw that very clearly when we had COVID. Suddenly the supply chain became sexy.
Yeah.
Nobody was wanting to be in supply chain before COVID. And the thing was that you saw a lot of capital that suddenly came into wanted to fund all different small startups who invented all kinds of convenience. And the thing was that we actually educated our end consumers in that you could get anything you wanted. If you wanted to have a parcel thrown out with a parachute, you could almost get it, because somebody actually financed that. But the thing was, these models, they were not resistant over time, because
Mm.
they were just crazy ideas, and there was no sustainability in them. But what did it do? It played with my mind. It played with your mind. They're saying, yeah, we can get everything. But the problem is, you can't get everything. But that also means that when you look at that, your wildest dream cannot be served. And that means that also that it has an impact on how we as end users actually would like to have the greatest freedom of making our own solution, which is something which is not feasible on the other side. So suddenly you got this gap between what you think you can get and what you can get, because it played with our mind that we had all these startups coming up with all kinds of solutions. So I think that what you see now is you see much more of a consolidation, because this business is a tough business. And that's why you see a drive towards locker solutions, which is a consolidation. You see a drive towards PUDOs also, in that sense, because that's also a good thing. But you also see a drive that we're starting to discuss: should home delivery, should it be more costly? Should we increase the price? Should we look into that it actually means something where you live? Do you live in remote areas? Yes, it will be much more expensive to deliver to you, and especially with a home delivery, than it would be in a consolidated delivery, where you can deliver between 200-300 parcels in one drop in a PUDO point, or in a locker that can take 200-300 parcels. So there is these differences, and they are now becoming quite more outspoken. So we probably will see that there will be a price range that will differ a little bit more in the future, because none of us could actually make money on it. And that's why you see consolidation is happening. Companies that never worked together before now works together, because it also makes good sense. So there's a lot of things happening that we come from this gigantic freedom of the 60s, and then we're coming back now to something that is meaning that, okay, fine, we need to have rationale. There needs to be there needs to be some money behind it.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot about structure as well, and about having this convenience on both ends. As you mentioned, it's very stressed part time at the moment, so it's really important to have that covered for both sides, and consumers, and the teams and logistics industry in general who works on providing those services. Okay,
Yeah, I
thank
think
you.
I would just wanted to say that's why it's
Yeah.
super important that we work together. It's super important that we sit down and take discussions on what is it. I usually call it like project sales. You need to figure out what
Mhm.
is it that in order to meet your needs as a shipper towards the needs that you have as an end consumer, where we actually as a carriers have a pretty good idea about what they want also. Let's sit around the table and take a discussion, and try to figure out what is the best solution, which fits all of us, so everybody can be happy.
Yeah, I remember at Leaders in Logistics, I'm not sure who said that. Maybe it was even you, Christian, but there was this phrase: you cannot innovate alone. And it's not only about innovation in terms of the new like tools which have never seen the market before, but it's also about the direction, the growth, and the actually scaling of the industry. So it's really important to have established great partnerships and collaborations in place so you can move that forward and drive that progress.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
Another thing that I actually wanted to touch on today is fragmentation. So, getting to my new question, postal and parcel networks, they depend on so many moving parts like hubs, transport, drivers, lockers, service points, customer apps, and retail systems. And also, they include even external partners too. My question is, why do you think it is still so difficult for large logistic organizations to operate as one coordinating system?
Well, there's quite a lot of things that actually has a huge impact on that, and I think that one of the thing is the way that we are basically thinking when it comes to operation,
Mhm.
and it comes to our companies. We are very much siloed. I think that there's one of the biggest problems is that we have a silo mindset, and I think that when I built the first parcel business, I found out that on my own, because when you parcels were not really existing, it was just a byproduct of the data, so to speak. But when you needed to build a parcel business, you needed to go across every function. You needed to talk to sales. You needed to make sure that the transport and the first mile and the sorting and the last mile and customer care and everybody was actually aligned on making one process that was fitting. And I think that siloing is really something that is different. And when you see what differs between the ones who are really good and the ones who are not good, is that they have managed to break down the silos. And I think
Mhm.
that the thing is that's happening now is more like we are, if you see some of these Chinese companies, they always say from the beginning, we're just using, like, we're connected from one end to another. Our whole business is just one orchestration. This is actually where it makes a difference when you get to that. But it also means that you need to know what you're doing. You need to have strong processes. You need to have very good KPIs that actually motivates that you work not in silos, but works in an orchestration where everybody knows what they have to do in order to reach the joint task. So it's a mindset that we need to
Mhm.
establish, especially in traditional companies, because it is very, the sales director, he is, he's working on hope, in the sense that he hopes that he can sell as much as possible, and he sells dreams, and he makes sure that that this is an area where you get as soon as you sign the contract, you feel like, okay, I've solved all my problem. I'm saying this now, we're not patronizing, because I've been like that. And on the other hand, if you're operationally mindseted, you always want to save costs, because that's the only thing that people interest for, is how efficient you can be. And um, and the thing is that I always went back, and I never forgot when I was working with the first parcel business we were building up. I always went to the sales director and said to him, "Do you want to know?" Because I was responsible for the operation. I said, "Do you want to know how much you sold yesterday?" Because he had a prediction saying that my sales is gonna go this way, and I had a prediction saying, "Hey, I can't do anything before you actually I see the customer
Yeah.
on my rate." And I think also that's why we found out that there's some KPIs which when the time from when we signed a contract to we saw the first customer parcel inside in some terminal, that was actually quite long. But he had lived on this dream that he had sold, and we didn't dare to use any of his forecast in order to make sure that we could produce afterwards, because making cost is very easy, but getting the cost out is actually quite challenging when you sit in an operational world. So one of the things that is really bad is that if you don't talk as one unit, and if you don't talk and coordinate and make sure that we are doing the same thing. And the thing is that, as operation can be very beneficial when you go and make contracts with the customers, but it's very rarely that you were allowed to talk to customers. That was like their domain. we were only allowed to make sure that we didn't make any damages. So it's something that goes very very long back in the DNA on how we are working. We are working in areas. We are taking control of that areas. We have the KPIs and everything goes that way. But very few KPIs go the other way and make sure that we are doing some kind of orchestration and working together and making sure that we do that as a whole. There's a lot of things saying we should do it, but there's a lot of things when it comes to operational and when the shit hits the fan, so to speak, that you have to fix the problems inside your own area. So
Yes.
that's one of my experiences.
That's actually something that we see from the technical standpoint as well, totally. The challenge is that every person only sees the part of their operation, but no one has trusted single, like united operational picture. I wonder if you had to choose one root cause for this, is the biggest disconnect usually the data, the decision making, or accountability?
Well, that's a good question. I think that
Apart from that being part of our DNA, I should say.
yeah, but it's data can always be a problem, but it can also be a solution. So that's
Mhm.
where it's a question about how you democratize. It's been something we said long time now about democratizing data, but it's actually the fact is that we all work on the same data platform, and we usually don't because the data is also kept in silos, and this is where we fail many times. I think that also the connectivity that we haven't. I think that the ones who now we saw UPS this I think it's 2 weeks ago or this week that they've been working for 5 years about putting tags on all their parcels. They put RFID tags, which is was a fantastic idea. It's something I started to look at back in because I hated the scans. That because everybody missed the scans, so I wanted to have something that the data capture was automatically. I think that we will see UPS getting some really impressive benefits by having one data set that will move across the whole process, and not something that is put up into silos. So I would think that uh, I think that they will probably be the first ones, since they're one of the first ones who actually does that in a big scale, that get the benefit out of actually building up an infrastructure where you build on one set of data. I think that that's going to be quite impressive for them. So yes, data is super important, but it's also about the connectivity.
Mhm.
Making sure that you have control over all your assets, so to speak, that you know what you do when and where.
Basically, it's all connected. So if data is fragmented, decisions are slower. If decisions are unclear, then accountability it becomes blurry, and then everything just starts moving in the
Mhm.
cycle. Okay,
Yeah.
so okay, thank you very much. That's actually a very interesting point. And with the UPS, I believe many companies are looking into that direction at the moment. So we are definitely going to see more and more of those data unification layers in the near future. But
Yeah.
definitely interesting to see how it moves and actually goes with them. Okay,
Mm.
so let's also talk about the gap between planning and execution. Plans in logistics are built with the best available assumptions, but they rarely goes exactly as planned, unfortunately, especially in the life of logistics specialist and or operator. What are the most underestimated factors, to your opinion, that disrupt daily execution in last mile or parcel operations?
I think the biggest problem that we have is that we are measured very hard every day. That you have the thing when you do a last mile operation. One of the things is that you are executional. That you will never be better than the day before, and I think that it's also one of the charms, but it also limits the risk taking. Because you know what you have and you don't know what you don't have. So when you talk about the disruption, it is taking a chance, and taking chances is something that you want actually to avoid taking chances when you are in last mile. So you have this mismatch about all these fantastic new things that are coming, and all the that your measurement is really really hard. That you have end consumers, you have shippers that will measure you and make sure that your quality is okay, that your performance are okay, and then somebody comes from like me and saying, hey, I have now Irina, I have now a new solution where we can turn everything upside down. It's fantastic, and it's gonna work. That's a little belief in that it's gonna work because you are measured so hard, and I think that is both a charm and also really a blocker for disrupting our industry. And it's human.
Hmm. So it's more about the changing behavior, right?
Yeah, it's the change management is really hard when it comes to these facts where you are measured very hard, um, because you have to trust other people, and
Yeah.
you haven't been many times, you haven't even been listened. Nobody has asked you about the decision was taken somewhere else, and then you have to trust it, and you're going to be measured on it, and you're probably going to build up a lot of defenses, that it wasn't my fault, it was always somebody else's fault, I didn't take this decision, and blah blah blah. So there is the change management when it comes to last mile is actually really 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 large, and you are used to the solutions that they are like this, and you find comfort in them. And I think that this is some of the things I see with the solutions I'm developing, is that you really, and at the same time, that somebody of your friends bought a vacuum cleaner which was a robot, and it works really well, and you think, oh, that is nice, I would also have one, because I don't need to do that and I don't need to do that. So you have this, that when you're in your private life, you're more willing to take other risks. Yeah, I have an electronic, a robot what do you call, lawnmower, and it fixes my things when I'm not home. It's fantastic. But when it comes to something where you are measured every day, I think that your risk taking is lower. But we have this case where we see that people actually also come to you as a provider, or somebody that's going to look at the future and have an expectation that AI will help you, or smart glasses will work because I'm a gamer in my spare time, and I see that it's really good, and I can almost look through walls, I can do all kinds of things, and then when it comes to the tools that you give me to deliver, I only get a scanner, and I have to follow a plan. I'm used to go through walls in my spare time. It's so you have this mix of what decision takers dare to do, combined with what actually people who are in the operation, what they would like to do. Because
Hmm.
I think before we got GPSs almost in our vehicles, distribution vehicles, we had them all in our private cars because we didn't know where we were going anyway. So you have this strange mismatch that is happening in when it comes to disrupting yourself.
Yeah, so it's basically not about the big disruptions, but I should say like the daily variabilities that happened in the life of the logistics specialist, and which we compare to our personal lives as well.
If you look at, we've been talking about drone deliveries for like 10 years, and now you can see what you can do with drones. You can do almost everything. And I think that when we have emergencies or we have other places, other things, we will see these technologies actually works, but we haven't dared to use them. And that I think that there was one drone in US that fell down because it landed on a cloud. It thought the cloud was
Mm.
actually the man, and then suddenly nobody was all drone deliveries stopped and stuff like that because one drone made a mistake. Luckily it was not a fatal mistake, but it's there's a very little risk taking that we are willing to do. And we see that in 2018 I thought we would have autonomous vehicles in 20, but because the technology was not that far away. But what happened was regulatory was not on our side,
Yeah.
and we're still not there. We're still not. We're far away from having autonomous distribution vehicles, even though it would make perfect sense that we have a vehicle that drives to follow the route, and we have a co-driver which is actually going and making sure that we get delivered the parcels, and can prepare, and the route will be followed because the guy is not driving. So it will drive in the most optimal way, and it will be an efficient delivery. And we he doesn't need to go to the depot to be picked up. He can be picked up at the first spot for delivery or just before that, and he can even be dropped off if he lives in the local area at his home, and the vehicle can drive back and charge by itself by parking into a parking lot where it can exchange the batteries by itself. There are so many technical possibilities which is not going to happen because there are regulatory things that we need to challenge first.
Yeah.
So sometimes we are our own enemy also.
Yeah, there is a bright future in logistics, definitely, but still some steps to take before that happens.
We are
Yeah.
far away right now, but but we see also solutions are coming. But I'm an optimist, but I always know that because I believe in technologies, I always push a little bit further than we can do. But I think we will see definitely a completely changed distribution in the future. And as I usually say, that technology moves 3 times faster than a business year.
Mhm.
So it goes very fast, and I think that we saw that with the Beijing half marathon for humanoids, where last year it ran in 2 hours and 50 minutes and was passed by a human by almost the double. And this year it actually won the race on 50 minutes, and it's just in 1 year.
Yeah.
This is an amazing development that we see.
That's actually is amazing, and that this is very insightful conversation, Christian. Thank you very much. What I really take from this discussion is that um, logistics is definitely the industry to be in at the moment, and last mile performance is a very exciting direction. It's not only about faster routes, better apps, or more data, but about how the whole system works together. Planning, execution, technology, everything is connected now, and we have to keep that promise that we give our customers, and we have to stick to it. We also touched a very important point on the convenience today. It's never free. Someone pays for it, and we have to listen to us, to ourselves, and to customers as well. And either through cost, complexity, and efficiency or pressure, unfortunately, that has to be paid somehow. So we have to balance that part. One last question before we close. If you could give one piece of advice to logistic leaders preparing their networks and their growth for the next 5 years, just short answer, what would it be?
No, I think we should embrace innovation. It's just as simple as that. Many of the problems that we have can be solved already today with an open mind. And I
Mhm.
think an innovation for me is everything from using AI to actually using technologies like robotizing or autonomous vehicles or whatever we talked about. I think we have to step up and use an open mindset, because we will not have people enough to do the deliveries, and our growth will stop with that. So as a the only thing that I can see that can solve this is actually technology.
That's a great point. And open mindedness, I hope everyone will be open to that part, because I definitely support this fully. Christian, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts today and for joining. I would like to thank also everyone who listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, subscribe and share it with someone working in logistics, parcel delivery, last mile operations, or supply chain transformation. It's definitely very valuable. Thank you very much, Christian, and see you in the next one.
See you next one.